have a session called the Post Environment, and it's going to be presented dually. First up will be Rik Tester, and then John Daro on a PowerPoint, and then whilst I'm chatting, you get your PowerPoint up, Rik. Rik is from ONSIGHT, which is a post-production house in the UK, but they're also a sort of turnkey 3D operation. They rent 2D cameras as well to the broadcast and film markets, and specialize in 3D rigs and technicians, and have a digital lab and look after all your rushes and take your film from first shot to final shot. So Rik is at the head of post-production there, one of the chief engineers there, so is very involved in the whole workflow process, etc. And then we have, after Rik's done his piece, John Daro, who's one of the senior colorists at FotoKem and also an expert in 3D, will take us through some shots from Journey to Space on what to do with the shot once it arrives in the digital lab. Rik's been involved in films such as most of the Attenborough films that come onto the giant screen, Museum Alive. I did an opera film with him. What other were your main films, Rik? Tiny Giants, absolutely fantastic. Soup to nuts on Tiny Giants, all the 3D equipment, all the 3D post. So they've done a lot. And here he is, Mr. Rik Tester.
Thank you, Phil. So you've heard a lot today already about... Oh, sorry, right up here. Thank you, Phil. He's like my dad. So we've heard a lot already about post-production today. Post-production is a fairly big topic, probably too big to fit in the 10-15 minutes I've got. So what I thought I would do is talk a bit more conceptually to you about what essentially is the challenge of Giant Screen 2 creating a post-production workflow, and then move on to revealing what ONSIGHT's current approach is to meeting that challenge. And then following on from that, I'll talk a little bit about the post environment in which that plan is executed. So to restate the obvious to all, it's a big screen and you're very close to it, so not one seat further away than one screen width. So therefore, as covered earlier today, digital resolutions are stretched to their breaking point. This is most significant on wide shots or shots that are very resolution hungry, so things like jungles, foliage, etc. So the requirement for any workflow would be to maintain high quality. The quality threshold is very, very high for this format. So the workflow must endeavor to preserve resolution, bit depth, remain uncompressed, not subsample color. And the other thing I find myself saying to a lot of people is you must try to accumulate all the marginal gains throughout the entire process. This was touched on this morning, and what we mean by that is you've got to choose the right sort of lens, so the lens must be able to resolve 4K and above. You must choose a high definition camera. You must, or you should try to record raw or uncompressed, and that's just all the excuse me, all the decisions associated with production. But moving on to post-production, you've got a similar set of decisions to make. So you must again endeavour to maintain high quality, not compress your pictures, preserve everything that was acquired until the last possible moment. So the other part of the challenge is that this format has a large potential for a large number of versions, because there are a lot of subsets within the giant screen format, which is also obviously requires special attention. Stereo 3D, that is specialist post. 4K, that is also specialist post. So just to dig in a bit further onto the potential version problem, I usually divide it into two categories. First of all, versions, and then second of all, deliverables. So just to kind of show you why is it that so many different versions are required. Well, first of all, editorial. Usually there are 20-minute versions and 40-minute versions of your film. If you've got a 3D film, you're going to have a 2D version and a 3D version. So straight away, you're going to have a 40 2D and 3D and a 20 2D and 3D. That's 4 versions. If you're making a dome version as well, that's potentially 6 versions. Aspect ratio, this also triggers a multiple of versions, especially moving forward into the new IMAX GT system, 4:3 digital, as well as 4:3 full throttle. That's a 1570 film is also important. So these aren't individual versions, but they kind of multiply each other. I'm pretty sure you can see that. So light levels as well. So this will also trigger extra inventory in terms of versions. This will also come to bear once we're delivering 14-foot Lamberts for laser. So each of these potential versions require a picture master, which will be a digital source master, or will be basically one or two of those three items on the list. DSMs typically are made, then sent out to film out. But DCDM, if you're interested in know more detail about those top two items, if you look at the DCI specification, they're there laid out. So once you have a picture master of every one of your versions, you then move on to distribution deliverables. And there's a lot of variation as well in the market associated with that. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that because of the different formats that your film can be shown in, that will create a large number of versions. And because of the variation in theatrical presentation, that will downstream fan out into an even larger set of versions. And if you add audio to the mix as well, that triggers, again, multiple inventory. So it's a bit of a growth monster. So the challenge is you need a high, or the quality threshold is very high. You have to maintain that throughout post. And the other aspect is that you've got specialists and varied versions. So our current approach to that problem is something we're calling the mezzanine render. Now, a mezzanine render is a common asset or a common denominator from which all of your other versions can be made. So at certain stages in your post-production workflow, it's possible to bake in certain common processes from which all other versions can be made downstream. And it's important that this mezzanine render be as high quality as possible and also maintain maximum options for everything moving forward. So once you've made your mezzanine render, what we then go through a process of is for each version of your film, we combine a number of destructive or creative processes as a kit of parts on top of your mezzanine render, and then we will make a picture master, and then we will move on to the next version, and we'll assemble a different combination of destructive or creative elements on top of that mezzanine render. And that list there of 4 things is just examples of the sorts of things that we would assemble as a kit of parts. Now, so to demonstrate or to illustrate, hopefully, that point, I've created a cute little animation, which I'm hoping will help you understand what I mean. So imagine you're in your post environment and you have a conformed 3D raw sequence. The first thing we probably do with this is we would create a stereo correction. This is kind of been covered, I think, a little bit by Sean, but essentially, in short, this is, and also will be covered by the next session by John Daro. But in short, it is the process by which we remove any sort of alignment errors and color mismatch errors in camera. And at this point, we make our first, thank you very much, we make our first mezzanine render, which we refer to as the tech pass render. So we make an image sequence, a stereo corrected image sequence, which is at native aspect and resolution. So in the example of red, that would be 5K, 1:8:9, and depending on which is best for the project, we'll either commit that to 10-bit log or that will be 16-bit. So it's important to note that we never get rid of the 3D RAW. It's always there in the stack. If we want to go back and find something or we've lost anything, that's fine. But what I'm trying to communicate to you is that we make an uncompromised intermediate render that retains all work or technical work thus far, but retains all maximum options moving forward. So on top of that, we might then go and do a depth grade for 185. This will include a bit of pan and scan. And then after the stereo depth grade is done, we may do a color grade. And at that point, pretty much we're ready to make DCI compliant or IMAX digital compliant picture masters, 2D and 3D. But as demonstrated this morning, you're probably going to go through some digital remastering processing in order to make your pictures optimal for the giant screen. 3 minutes, Christ, I'm getting to the goal, don't worry. So at this point, we're going to make our last and final mezzanine render. We always do this in the context of the color grade, but the depth grade is destructive because it involves image scaling, cropping, floating windows. So what we do is we take this out of the stack and we keep that for later. And we make a digital remastering render. This is our final mezzanine render. And then from this point, we make all our versions using a various kit of parts. So for example, we can bring back our depth grade we just took out of the stack, and we can make our 2D and 3D DCI compliant and IMAX digital compliant deliverables. Or alternatively, we might choose to do a pan and scan to 4K 3D and in 4:3. We may also put on top of that a 20-minute cut down, or instead we may do a color adjustment. So what I'm trying to explain is, or hopefully I've successfully explained, is that the way to approach this problem is to create these large, uncompromised renders, and then a kit of parts which are assembled on a case-by-case basis depending on the version that you're making. So, how do we execute this marvelous plan? The post environment. The infrastructure has to be built in order to handle 3D 4K and above. It will be a large volume of data, not just in terms of capacity, but also in terms of throughput. So if you want to grade in 4K, which is completely possible, then you're going to need an infrastructure that can support that. It's not a simple thing. And lastly, what I want to talk about, just to round it off, is relevant monitoring and review. I would suggest that in your DI, it's essential to have 4K and 3D monitoring on projection. I include the Oculus Rift there just because that's an interesting area of R&D for us. We think that is good for previewing editorial, may even be good for previewing shots on location as well. But the image quality isn't good enough. But there's no substitute really for the real thing. These are pictures of the BFI, which is in Waterloo in London. And what we do is we take an offline 3D edit and we review it there. All the stakeholders have an opinion about framing, pace, things like this. We'll view it at that point. We'll also view it at the point of finished depth grade and finished color grade. So then we can then make we can prejudge how the digital remastering process will take place. We can also weed out shots in terms not just for framing and things like that and editorial, but also for image quality before we go into the digital remastering process. So I recommend that you build a relationship with your local IMAX theatre so that you have access to this sort of monitoring and review. And that's it. Thank you.
So let's just do a sound check on John. John, do we have you at the back there?
All good.
All good.
All good. I'm going to start a guy behind, and nobody
Excellent.
sees me. So, like Phil said earlier, I'm John Daro. I'm the senior colorist over at FotoKem.
He's going to introduce himself, I think. There you go.
It's all good.
He's in.
So I've been lucky enough to get into SGO Mistika early on, about 4 years ago. And the great thing about the Mistika pipeline is that you can do multiple versions off of the one timeline. It's extremely powerful. The only limitation is the operator running it. So whatever you guys can think of, we should be able to achieve. If we can't, it's my fault and I'm sorry. unlike most presenters, I like to be interrupted. So if you guys see something and you have that question, let's not wait till the end. While it's fresh in your mind, shout it out and we'll try to hit it on the fly. So without further ado, I'm going to show you guys a trailer that for a film that we just finished up called Journey to Space. That was directed by Mark Penzine, edited by Dale Belden, produced by K2 Communications and Giant Screen. We'll go ahead and show you guys the trailer, and then I have a small sequence of shots that will go through and kind of show the work that we did on it. They're raw stereo. We'll start from basic geometry correction, take it into 3D manipulation, and then finally positioning it for
Mistika, FotoKem for providing John Daro, Real D provided the
these would be great too.
various technologies to turn a 2D projector into a 3D system. And did Real D provide the screen? Who provided the screen? Yeah, and then Christie, of course, again, for providing the projectors in the first place. Onwards and somewherewards.
Audio for this is good. Cheers, we won't take any more time. We'll go ahead and roll. Audio.
We are the species that explores. We built
Audio.
machines to explore
Audio.
high. Heroes flew them beyond what seemed possible,
Crank it.
and it wasn't enough.
We're completing a chapter of a journey that will never end. Let's light this fire one more time.
I don't know if I'll ever get to walk on Mars, but I may already know some of those who will.
Okay.
Coming soon.
Well, not quite sure what happened to the audio there, but we'll take another look at that afterwards. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so to start, let me go ahead and just play you guys. You can keep your glasses on, although this is uncorrected, so I'm not liable, but I do have aspirin if you guys need it afterwards. Gonna go ahead and just play the raw shot as it is. So this, when it comes to FotoKem, this is what I get. And what we're looking at right now, we'll go ahead and pop through each one of these shots and kind of show you the differences in the left and right eye. But this one in particular has a little bit of phasing issues, some retinal conflict in between both eyes. One's a little bit darker, one's a little bit brighter. The red is not quite the same in each eye. This shot here just feels a tad bit on the flat side. We can go ahead and help that out as well by kind of reseating it into the screen. This shot, aside from just being very flat and not very visually appealing, we are breaking the screen edge on that side, on the right side. This one as well, a little bit of conflict on the right edge. Okay, so let's go ahead and start fixing some of these. Okay, for starters, I'm going to toggle back and forth between the left and the right eye. And you can see that this eye is much brighter than this one and also has a little bit of like a vignette type shape. So an overall correction is not going to fix this. So let me go back into stereo, and the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and match the geometry. And by hitting the geometry now we've got it pretty much the same, and we don't have any vertical motion, we just have horizontal motion. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to go ahead and match that color. Usually there's a dominant eye. We always try to choose the dominant eye and not touch that one. We fix the other eye. For 2D versions that come after this, we go ahead and use that dominant eye that has the least amount of fixes applied to it. So now what we end up with there is we have two eyes that have been equalized, the geometry's been balanced, and that's looking pretty good and it's ready for some color. Now as far as color correction goes, maybe just put a little bit of contrast in there. It's a little bit on the green side, we'll pump some blue in. and potentially a bit of sat. Okay, now the geometry's been done, color's been done, the last thing that I'd like to do is another stereo node on top of that. And this stereo node, what this is used for is kind of to balance. This will be the one that I can either push things farther away or closer to us. Let me go ahead and kick back into stereo. So now what you can see, well, there we go. So I want to push this farther away, and what the laser is doing right now is it's showing where screen plane is. Or, on the flip side, I can bring this closer to us. See, so now it's coming towards us. But I think that for this particular shot, we're going to want to play this farther back and somewhere around there, let's say. Okay, and then finally, we would go ahead and do our repos for 4x3. Now, in this particular case, we're going to go ahead and position it for 4096, 3072. One thing that I do like doing is trying to maximize the horizontal resolution as much as possible. The fact that we're getting a little bit of black on top, we can fix using a warper. So again, we'll apply that warp node. On the right-hand side, you're about to see that. So what I can do here is then go ahead and just stretch that top part just to fill the screen just enough. Again, another framing on top. And just to clean my edges up. There's my stretch. And that would be my final 4x3 shot. Maximizing the horizontal video resolution there. All right, takes us to this next one. Let's go ahead and see what issues we have on this shot. Again, toggling left and right. So we see that it's, color's off, density is a little bit different. We have a dark area on this one on the left-hand side that's going to kill our depth cues that are back there. So first thing we're going to do is go ahead and try to balance that out, equalize the two. This one, instead of doing it on one eye, I'll go ahead and do it in stereo so you can see as we click what happens. So first things first, we'll match that geometry up. And we'll go ahead and match the color. And again, if we need to position this for depth reasons, let's say that we want to play it right on him and then have this come slightly off screen. I think that's a good spot to end up on that one. And again, we'll want to go ahead and position that into 4x3. And that one, because of the bubbles, it would look weird if we did a warp, so we'll just probably leave that one as is, center extraction. This one, again, match the geometry. Go ahead and balance the color. Take it into a 4x3 world.
Can you do like a big stereo on that where it's sort of floating in front of us?
Talking, what do you say?
Can you like do a very hyper stereo? It shows what that would look like if you pull the submarine more into our plane. Can you do that? Just like quickly?
Yes.
Just wondering if you can just quickly do like a hyper stereo. So show us what it would be like to push that submarine right into our faces a bit and then push it back.
Ah,
What's
yeah,
the
no problem.
possibility? I've always dreamt about that. Maybe you
No
can do
problem.
that.
See, now here's the thing, though. There's certain things that you got to think about when setting up a stereo shot. What works coming out at you, right? Your brain's always smarter than your eyeballs are. So what works are things that are not touching any edges, right? Things that would naturally be floating. That's why space films, underwater films work great in 3D. Because what you want is you want to have something that is kind of in the center of the screen, smaller, that is coming way off. If it's something that's on the edge or it's touching the bottom, because of the proscenium, your brain's going to say, wait a minute, I know where that screen is, and part of it's getting cut off. So how could something that is coming towards me be cut off by something that is behind it? And immediately your brain will take over and smack it right back to screen plane. So let me go ahead and show you on a shot that will work better for demonstrating
Yeah, pick
that.
whichever one you want, but it's like a dream for mine, so you can help it out. Thanks.
Okay, now on this one, for making sure that the 4x3 is correct, I feel like we want to see more of that sub, right? And again, trying to get it off of that edge will allow us to push that out now. So again, here's screen, right? And what we want to go ahead and do, let's try to push this into the audience for a bit. Watch your eyeballs. Okay, that's like right over your guys' heads now from back here. Probably hard to fuse up in the front. Again, people in the back are going to have a little bit easier time, but that is way off screen now. So completely cranked, and we were able to do that by adjusting the horizontal image translation. Basically what we're doing is we're taking the left and moving the left to the right and the right to the left, and that's going to bring it towards us. And again, that was a symmetrical correction, but often, especially with animated films, we won't do that. We'll leave the left eye exactly where it is, and then just move just the right eye, so that when it comes time to do a 2D version, we go ahead and just use that left eye that has not been touched and has remained in the center. Okay, again, this one, we'll go ahead and start with the geometry, although the geometry on this is not looking horrible. Probably just needs a little bit of adjustment in that bottom right-hand corner. Let's go ahead and set the color. See, immediately that gets easier to look at. See, this is before, and do you see how there's something just off with it? It kind of feels a little bit shiny, where this is now equalized there. So now that we've equalized that color, let's go ahead and deal with the creative color aspect, because this is looking like a pretty murky ocean. So we're going to want to go ahead and add some contrast. And a bit of magenta, because that water's looking pretty depressed. And we're getting some more out of the fake rock surface. And then for dome reasons, it's always good to put a grad up on top. So we want to make sure that that is taken down. And then let's go ahead and do our 4x3. And I think for the repo on this one, we want to put him more in that dome sweet spot so that it works for both flat, 3D, and dome presentations. And that'd be our finished shot. So let's go ahead and do the same thing to this one. Now, because it's the same location, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to steal that correction and apply that across. A little contrasty, but got us halfway in the zone. Let's go ahead and do the 3D adjustments. Again, let me show you the left and right eyes. So major differences there. Let's go ahead and fix the geometry. Pop back and forth now. That's looking better. Let's go ahead and fix the color. Now, in this particular case, I think I'm going to choose to match to the other eye, because you see how this eye is getting a little bit softer now? Also, I preferred the color from the other eye, so I'm just going to go ahead and switch that. A little bit more drama, a little bit more of a quality image there. So in that case, I'd have to keep a note reminding me that for that version, when we're building a 2D version, we build what's called the best eye version, where we take the best of the 3D, whether it be the left or the right. In that case, we're going with the other eye. Again, the grad on top. Overall, we're feeling a little contrasty, so let me lift this up. And we got some red in our black, so we can go ahead and neutralize that out real quick. And that's looking pretty good. So again, pre-grade, after grade, and our 4x3 repo. Maybe just a little bit right there. There we go. Playing that diagonal. Okay, now that we've gone ahead and hit everything, let's take a play through. Oh, that's not very stereo. Hold on, we were just looking at one eye. There we go. And we'll play it top to bottom. So again, being mindful of the top, trying to make sure that we don't get too bright up there. Trying to keep the sweet spot in that, the dome sweet spot, the lower third center. And much more comfortable than when we started. Now, these changes are small, right? But over 40 minutes, that's aggregate. So every change that you can make that makes it comfier on the viewer over the entire presentation is going to add up. What we don't want to do as stereo artists is, the golden rule is do no harm. I loved how Sean put it with the 7 deadly sins of stereo. Really what we're trying to do is fix as many of those as we can. The real big one to touch on is out-of-phase shots. That is extremely hard to fix and usually requires very expensive VFX fixing, if not completely throwing away one eye and doing some conversion techniques. Now, to touch on conversion for a second, I think there's a place for it, and especially in the DI bay, there's times where you're going to want a quick down and dirty conversion, right? There's houses, I'm sure a lot of you guys know them, the big players that do proper 3D conversion work. And when you guys need a shot, I highly recommend you do that. But in a pinch, if an eye is broken and we're hit up against a deadline, we can do some pseudo-dimensionalization in the DI room. And what I mean by pseudo is we basically take a section and we start to build out rotomasks. So for that particular shot, I started to cut out the shuttle, the scaffolding there. We start to add various layers to it. I wanted that little bit, so we start rotoing that out, and we start to build a luma map. Now, this luma map is going to say what's farther away from us and what's closer, right? So as we get to that map level, then we can apply that to the original shot. And in that original shot, I can actually add that depth. So I'm just going to turn this sideways like that. Let me decrease the I/O a little bit. There we go. And we can actually show you that just like inflating a balloon, like if I was just to blow air into it, I can give that depth now. And now when I rotate around that, I have pseudo depth. Again, this is a cheat, but it's something that we can do in the AI bay, rather cost effective. Is it ever going to be as good as a conversion from a proper conversion house? No. And on Journey to Space, some of the shots were done in the DI bay, and then others were farmed out to Prime Focus, which did excellent work. And again, so at this point, once we've taken and comped it back onto the background, you can see that it's a cheat, it's pseudo depth, but I'll show you the final shot of this. Once everything was rotoed, and this was meant to be a background to place some low resolution standard definition footage into the dome sweet spot. So you should never really be looking at the background anyway. It's more about the action that was happening in the center. I think it's pretty evident that it works great as a background and really gives you a sense of depth, and it's much better than a 2D plate would be back there. It's also a good trick to go ahead and take less than stellar footage and appropriate it for the biggest screen in the world. Okay, now I kind of touched on it a little bit as far as formatting for 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, the key here is that most digital cameras these days shoot at a 1:8:9 aspect ratio or 1:7:8. Not optimum for taking it to 4:3. Now, when we go for the 1:3:3 aspect ratio, what I like to do is I want to try to keep that X resolution, which those digital cameras have a lot of, right? And I want to take this entire X and try to fit it inside of my 4:3. So this little piece right here kind of shows how that is achieved through a series of warping. So I'll just give you this little breakdown right now. So this is the raw shot as it came in. There were some dead pixels. We went ahead and fixed those. That's a base grade of color right there. That's positioning it in 4:3. You can see that we have a little bit of black on the top. Luckily, we just have clouds, so we're able to kind of go ahead and stretch that up. We want to throw a grad up on there, again, for dome presentations, and also makes a little bit more drama. So I just like it as a better picture with the grad up there. And that's a good way to maximize 178 and 189 footage, placing it into a 4:3 container. Okay, the last thing I want to show, and this is more about the future of where we're going in post. I happened to see this on this demo Mistika that these rhinos were here. This is something that I just stole from Peter. Where we're going is basically, we've used DPXs as the kind of workhorse file format for many years now. The future is EXR. Now, EXRs contain more channels than red, green, and blue. DPXs have red, green, and blue and can sometimes contain an alpha. What you can put in EXRs are multiple channels. For example, normals maps, which tells me what direction the light was coming in. So let me just do a quick grade on this. Let's say we want some Africa rhinos. And we want to make it nice, warm sun. And then you say, but John, the light's still coming in from high noon. We want this to be sunset. So okay, well, we can probably take care of that. And so by moving the light, we can say, all right, we want to be more sunsets, more side lit. And again, continue grading on that. The other thing that EXRs allow you to do is allow you to do separate your shots out very quickly without having to roto. So I can say, yeah, that's great, but we just want to highlight that one guy in the middle. He's our star rhino. And we can do that for various effects, for doing, maybe using that to put titles behind, or using that just for color correction. And again, wherever I click, that's the rhino that I'm going to get. Another thing that we can do is we can actually pick depth. So I can pick just a slice of one of these guys. Now, in picking one of these slices, what that allows me to do is that turns my normal standard color correction power windows and shapes from circles and squares into spheres and cubes. Very, very powerful, especially for doing like depth of field effects. So let me just show you kind of what that picture is like. That's what a normals map looks like. So that can be contained in that EXR file and passed through with that information, very similar to how a DPX has been used in traditional post. And I think with that about wraps it up, unless you guys got questions or want to play around with any of those shots that we worked on. Thank you much.
John, thank you very much indeed. That is the most concise explanation of how the Mistika works that I have attended in my years of Mistika demonstration attending. Has anyone got a question? Okay. Well, if
Which software
no one...
program were you using?
Sorry?
Which software program were you using?
That was SGO Mistika.
That's the name of it. SGO is the company, Mistika is the brand. It's a Mistika tool. And I'm sure they'll sell you one for 150 grand or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil, I'm curious about when you make all those corrections, what risk you have of losing resolution?
I've got a sharpener. No, whenever you process a picture, whenever you do anything to a picture, you are destroying data. So, you know, the key is do it in the least amount of steps possible. But on top of that, there are times where I will denoise a shot. Are we softening it? Yes. Is it a better picture? Yes. So it's not a problem. The other thing is when you denoise, you often put a little bit of sharpening back in. So I have a plugin that I've developed called FKI Amplify. It's not a sharpener. What it does is it actually looks forwards and backwards in time and takes detail that is not in the current frame, but folds it back in. So that is one way that you can kind of mitigate that problem of, yeah, I stepped on it a little bit, but look, I'm also enhancing it.
No pain, no gain. Can you have a microphone?
It doesn't. Is that working?
Okay, I'll come and bring this on, don't worry.
Hello, is that working? Yeah. In the past, to get your EDLs from something like an Avid into Mistika, there was nothing. It wasn't really working. Is there a solution now, or is Mistika looking?
Or are you saying just when you evaluated the Mistika software before?
That's right. In the past, we've used Mistika, but the EDLs from the Avid systems, for example, would not transfer into the Mistikas. So we had to go through a whole process of building databases and all that sort of thing. And as you guys know, post costs money.
Oh yeah, and conform should be press a button. I mean, producers will tell you, wait, it's not just press a button. You press a button, it's supposed to be auto-conform.
So is
but it's never that way.
Is there...
So where we're at today, much like I was just showing you guys how DPX is kind of what I consider the, you know, a little bit more of an antiquated file format, and EXR is the future. EDL is the DPX of project transfer. EDL served us great for many years, but now we have AAF, we have XML. And when you're offlining, let's say you do repos, picture-in-picture effects, you can actually then take that information and transfer it to your finishing system. But you cannot do that in an EDL. You can only do that through an AAF or an XML. Mistika works with EDLs, AAFs, and XMLs all flawlessly.
Yeah, but up till now, it hasn't worked with EDLs.
AAF is just actually, I think, being shown off at NAB right now. Yeah. XML has worked for about a year now. Yeah. And EDL conform is painful just in general. So, yeah.
But is this going to be across industry? Are we not going to, is Avid going to take this up? Is Avid going to take this up? Is Final Cut going to take this up? Are we all going to have one standard? Because this is where the problem...
Well, I think the two standards right now are XML and AAF. Final Cut being from the XML camp, and Avid using the AAF style. So, you know, and for us being a finishing house, we can accommodate. There's a lot of tools too for cleaning projects wherever they came from. Maybe potentially, often what I will do is take something that came from an Avid, run it through a program called Automatic Duck, take it into Final Cut, and now I have an XML that I can work with in a number of different platforms. So there's tricks to get around all of that.
Let's give it up for John Daro, ladies and gentlemen. John Daro, thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Thank you so much.
Kelly, are we having a cup of tea now? Kelly or Tammy at the back? Is it a tea break next door? Okay, so peeps, 15 minutes. Do you think that's enough time for a tea break? If you're back in here, start coming back in at about 25:30, please.